It's Lisa Graves. I'm here with Nadine Smith. We're here for the 5.5 your midweek break. Also want to do a shout out to our producers, Greg O'Lear and LB, for all of their support for this Wednesday night show. You all know the routine. It's 5 stories, 8 minutes. We slow things down to refuel and reflect. Remember, you are not alone and the glass is half full. So let me just begin by saying, hey, Nadine, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, actually. I took a hike today and saw some beautiful falls. And, there's just something restorative about being out in nature and probably just being away from cell service. So I couldn't catch up on what of the latest horror unfolding in America is.
Yeah, I feel like I only sort of really sleep on the weekends when the news cycle sort of slows down and I'm not bombarded with whatever the latest, outrage is. I actually took a long hike today inadvertently because my dogs got away from me. They were not as obedient as I would have liked. So I think I might have gone on a 1 or 2 mile little trek. But it's lovely up here in Wisconsin. We're not fully in the heat dome that's happening in a lot of other places in the country. So I'm grateful for that. But I'm also grateful for you, Nadine. It's a joy to do this show with you and talk about things that are actually really tough, but have the chance to talk about them with someone who I really respect and admire.
Oh, that is very, very sweet. And speaking of taking a hike, that leads us, of course, to the Trump administration.
Yeah, what can you say?
How was that for a segue?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I mean, so we put this on as topic 1 because we've all been witnessing the deny, distract, evade, insult strategy in response to the Epstein files and the there's not a list, there is a list, there are files, there aren't files, we're going to release them, we're not going to release them, and then it actually has been astonishing. I mean, I shouldn't admit that I'm still sometimes surprised by Trump, but like the fact that he was like, move along, and you're an idiot if you believe basically all the rhetoric that he's been using and his buddies have been using all this time to cast aspersions and innuendo and smears, and now suddenly like whoa, never mind, forget all that. And it comes as there are new revelations about the fact that Bondi apparently informed Trump that he was in fact in the files in different ways and more than mentioned more than once, along with other revelations, new details about people who came forward in the past to express concerns about Trump's relationship with Epstein and how he treated them, women who he either groped or was alleged to have groped, or who sort of eye scanned them in a way as if they were being served up as dinner for him. And then there are other stories that continue to fill out the relationship between Trump and Epstein, including the story in the Wall Street Journal that really talked about new information about how Trump reportedly was so close to Epstein. He was talking about the secrets they keep in a little stage dialogue he crafted in a card that was surrounded by a drawing of a naked woman with his signature as, we've all heard it, but it's pubic hair as a signature, which I don't think I can ever now forget that notion. And then Trump had the audacity to claim he never sketched, when in fact, there are multiple stories about how he was selling his sketches, not this particular sketch, but numerous sketches,
auctioning them,
in Sharpie, auctioning them off. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this deny, distract, evade, insult routine that Trump is up to?
Yeah, well, you know what? First of all, let's just sit for a moment with the reality that Pam Bondi went to the Oval Office, sat with Trump, and informed him of what he already knew, that he was in the Epstein files, right? And suddenly she goes from, we're going to release everything, it's horrible, it's horrific, maybe we have 10% of what is included. And what we know from what has been revealed thus far is so incredibly damning. But everything that she and Bongino, all of these people have been saying, it is so explosive, right? And now suddenly it's, wait, what are you talking about? When Trump said Epstein, 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 I was like, is he making fun of Marsha? I mean, is he? It's they have gone to this well over and over again, and the well is tell a huge lie and accuse your opponents of exactly what you do. Whether it's going after Hillary Clinton's foundation, which has pristine audits and has the top ranking, and calling it corrupt, while you are literally running a foundation so corrupt that you've been banned from running one ever again. And they have used the Epstein file to imply that their opponents are in there. They have used the horrific issue of human trafficking, child sexual abuse as a political stick to hit their opponents with. And they think if they are loud enough in calling out other people, we will not see that they are talking about themselves. But now they've boxed themselves into this corner because they cannot minimize the Epstein file because they've made it the cornerstone. This idea that there is a global conspiracy of high flying, elites who are trafficking children. And now with the Senate, the House, the White House, the infrastructure of government at his disposal, Trump suddenly is like, wait, what are you talking about? And he's going to this same playbook, but it's not working because the call's coming from inside the House. It is his base that is turning on him. Perhaps not that hardcore who will never turn on him, who will manufacture increasingly wild stories to justify. I heard one where it's like, yes, he's in there, but it was because, he was on deep cover to find these people and expose them. And we all know if there was anything that exonerated Donald Trump, if there was anything that made it clear that he was not close friends with a man whose MO was to find vulnerable, homeless, abused girls and trap them into a circumstance where not only were they victims, but they were coerced to find other victims among their friends. If there was anything that exonerated him, we know not only would he release it, he'd be selling bound copies of the Epstein file. So it's a fascinating moment because for the first time, and I'm thinking about Rich Logis right now, who we had on from Leaving MAGA, and he talked about how important it was that first moment where you begin to see a little bit of a crack, where a little bit of light comes through, and slowly you begin to expand the aperture of where you get information and just how vital that is to stepping away from these conspiracies. And we're starting to see it just a little bit.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary to see this all unfold and just the series of lies. Trump has said he was never on Epstein's plane. There are travel records showing he was on the plane numerous times, sometimes with his family, sometimes not. There are, pictures of them palling around. There's audio and interviews of Trump talking about Epstein and even saying that he knew that that they have something in common, and also saying that Epstein likes women young, or girls young. And now you have Trump suing the Wall Street Journal, like his lawyers basically, just sue, and then hopefully they'll settle. But, it's not just the Wall Street Journal. Murdoch and his family, his son, like they have control not just of the Wall Street Journal in essence as the owners, but also of Fox. And so this is really an area where the Journal's reporting, which they described as, well documented in terms of this birthday card from Trump to Epstein that Trump denies, this documentation really flies in the face of Trump's efforts to use other Fox platforms to basically distance himself from Epstein. And this also has happened, this unfolding story of Epstein, who was clearly involved in trafficking of women, clearly involved in bringing women in from outside the country. As Senator Blumenthal has noted from the Senate Finance Committee, there's more than $1 billion that flowed through one of Epstein's accounts. There are people attached to that money. Not all of it, came through Swiss bank accounts, I'm sure. And yet this administration is silent on following that money and revealing who gave who gave this man over $1 billion. And for what? What were they procuring with that cash? Now the Trump administration wants to just move along after, people who back Trump, some of the other conspiracy theorists, peddled the really, grotesque Pizzagate conspiracy that, resulted in threats against this, harmless pizza joint in Adams Morgan in DC as supposedly a sex trafficking arena. And meanwhile, one of the first things Trump did after he became president was help pave the way for the Tate brothers, who were charged abroad with trafficking in women, paved the way for their return to the United States. And so at some point, some people who, at least in theory, either really care about this or have used it as their platform, have got to see that they have, put all their marbles behind a guy who is not actually sincerely concerned about these issues. And in fact, has been, in my personal view, a sexual predator throughout his adult life in different ways.
Yeah. Well, speaking of deny, distract, and evade, one of the strategies that Trump is using is to pull out all the stops. He went from, change the name back to the Washington Redskins, return real sugar to Coca-Cola instead of high fructose corn syrup. And then in a page that he has leaned on time and time again, he called for the arrest of Barack Obama. And not only did he call for the arrest, he posted an AI-generated video of he and Barack Obama sitting together, and then the police come in and not only grab up Barack Obama to arrest him, but force him on his knees with his head bowed to Donald Trump. It is as appalling image as you can imagine. I think Obama responded by posting Trump's actual arrest, but also, put out a statement about, how much they don't want to dignify these kinds of outrageous things with a comment, but this one rose to the level that they needed to. But it reminded me, we had a guest on, I can't remember, just a few weeks ago, the author of American Scare, Robert Fiesler. And he was talking about how the Florida, the sort of the racist political infrastructure in Florida wanted to send a really strong message to Northerners moving to the South who were pro-integration. They wanted to destroy any infrastructure for civil rights. And he said their number one goal was to get a picture of the head of the NAACP in prison stripes on the side of the road working a chain gang. And they wanted that picture on the front page of every newspaper. And it was it is a racist fantasy.
Yep.
And I think that it is going to backfire. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but I think it is going to backfire because there is respect for Obama, but it's happening now. Again, it's a playbook he goes to again and again and again, but this time it's not working. This time his base is not going to be, or a significant portion of his base is not going to be distracted by any of this. And they see it in the context of how he's used it over and over again. So I think he is, he's flailing and he's reaching for everything he can get his hands on. And he's gone to the well one time too many.
Yeah, I mean, this is race baiting. It is just one of the most extreme things any president of the United States has ever done or said. This effort to portray President Obama as a criminal, a man who served our country honorably as president, had no scandals other than the ridiculous wore a tan suit scandal. That was the only thing they could possibly do. And that he had the audacity to try to get millions of Americans affordable health care. How dare he? How dare he do that? But, Obama, to target Obama in this way is just a sign of Trump's desperation. And also, Trump literally just last year got the biggest gift the Supreme Court has ever given to a president when John Roberts orchestrated the immunity from criminal prosecution for Donald Trump for his actions as president, his so-called official acts, retroactively and prospectively. This pardoning of Trump by John Roberts is what paved the way for Trump's return to power and has emboldened him to act in these king-like ways, in numerous ways, as well as the court, then the Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, that partisan court using its power to overturn lower court rulings over these past several weeks. But that immunity, that gift to Trump in its most general form applies to all presidents. So I'm not saying at all that Obama did anything wrong. He didn't. This is just ridiculous, made up, just outrageous bullshit. Say it. But even if there were any grain of truth to it, presidents now have immunity from criminal prosecution. So it's completely ridiculous. But let me just add a component of this that I just think is also pretty outrageous. The fact that Tulsi Gabbard, who is the director of national intelligence, is helping to peddle this nonsense, using the office of the director of national intelligence to suggest that Obama did anything wrong in the 2016 election, that the intelligence agencies, which uniformly, each of those agencies whose job is to monitor foreign intelligence activity, monitor Russian activity by the Russian state, by Putin, by his proxies, by cutouts, they all agreed that Russia tried to interfere in the 2016 election. Then there's James Comey, who interfered in his own way by his announcement about Hillary just weeks before the election. But the Russian interference was well documented on a transpartisan basis by the intelligence community, the very community that Tulsi Gabbard now helms. And it was documented in a bipartisan report by the Senate Intelligence Committee, SISI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, when Marco Rubio and others were on that committee. It was well documented by that Senate investigation. And it was before our own eyes when Trump called on Russia to steal Hillary's files and help him win. So the whole thing is nonsense. But let me just say, the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is the DNI is an outrage. She is not suited to that position. She was not qualified for that position, in my view, based on her really terrible judgment, where she was buddying up with Bashar al-Assad, went to Syria, basically to side with him. She accused the United States of supporting terrorists opposed to Assad. She has buddied, come up to become friends with other authoritarian leaders. She, has parroted Russian talking points, Putin's talking points about Ukraine. She has been someone who has, I think, a history of poor judgment. I personally, as someone who is a registered Democrat, I regret that she was ever a Democrat, because, I think, she's demonstrated poor judgment for quite a long time. But that's just in the past. That's like before she became the DNI. As DNI, she was on that text chain, the Signalgate text chain. And, members of Congress who heard her testimony talked about how, in their opinion, he lied. She and Gabbard and Ratcliffe lied repeatedly. That was Senator Michael Bennet in that testimony, lied repeatedly about whether classified information, secure information was shared on that signal with the journalist. The fact is that one of the most important components of intelligence gathering and intelligence use in the United States for our national security is not sharing troop movements, not sharing information about where bombs are going to happen, where troops are moving, where planes are flying. And that's, in fact, one of the only circumstances in which, under longstanding First Amendment law, that a government could call for a prior restraint, meaning restrain a newspaper from publishing that information because it puts our men and women in uniform in danger. And so she's lied to the Senate. She has a track record of terrible judgment. And now it looks like she's trying to kiss up to Trump by, spearheading this effort to try to blame President Obama, for the intelligence community's documented evidence about Russian interference. And on top of it all, this job, the DNI, it was created when I first started working on national security issues 2 decades ago. It is a real job. It's a serious job to be involved in protecting the American people from foreign threats. And instead, we have a political operative at the helm of that department using her power to try to curry favor with Trump by peddling nonsense about Barack Obama to back up Trump's latest efforts to distract from Epstein. Sorry about that rant, but
racist nonsense. Yes, absolutely. Well, listen, the one thing that Tulsi Gabbard has going for her is she's at least one of the non-Floridians in doing horrible things in the cabinet. And speaking of Florida, my segues are on point tonight.
They are.
Our guest tonight is a trailblazer in Florida politics. He's the first openly LGBT Latino elected to the Florida legislature, and he now serves in the state Senate. And he has been a fearless voice for civil rights, public health, government accountability. And he's been at the forefront of challenging DeSantis on book bans, his attacks on all manner of marginalized communities, affordable healthcare, gun safety. And he has been at the front line of resisting the concentration camp in the Everglades. So please welcome to the show my friend, my colleague, and Florida's Senator Guillermo Smith. Carlos, welcome.
Hey, y'all. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well,
for that wonderful introduction. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome. Well, you are one of the lawmakers who was at first denied entry to the Everglade boondoggle, and then later brought back. And I really wanted, I know we've talked about this this horrific development on the show before, but you, I think, are the first guest we've had who can talk about it firsthand, about the physical space that it is, but also about the political reality that created it. So talk about having gone there.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for inviting me to the show to talk about this. Look, over at the 4th of July holiday weekend, things began escalating in the news about the construction, certainly, of this terrible, cruel, un-American detention camp, but also it was immediately following the president's visit to the camp, where we could see actually that floodwaters were actually coming into the tents on the same day that the president brought Fox News down and was kind of initiating their propaganda promotion of what they wanted to put their version of what this site was going to be. They marketed this as a place that they were going to send the worst of the worst. And it turns out so much of what they told us was basically a deliberate lie. But more specifically, a group of us lawmakers basically had decided that it was really important for us to make a surprise trip down there on the 3rd of July to see what the conditions were for ourselves. Because currently we have the authority as legislators, which we have asserted many times. I have done this many times before, where I have visited a state prison. I have visited a municipal detention facility at my pleasure. That means under a Florida statute, actually, we are authorized to basically just show up to one of these detention centers whenever we want to exercise our oversight authority. That's Florida Statute 944.23 and 951.225. And it gives us the opportunity to kind of see the conditions as they are in real time, not what they want us to see, and not the sanitized tour that we ended up participating in days later. We were immediately refused entry on the 3rd of July. At first, they didn't really have an explanation for why they weren't going to let us in. Folks were calling managers and supervisors, and they were trying to get people on the phone to see exactly how they were going to handle the fact that myself and 4 other Democratic lawmakers had shown up. It was me, Senator Chevron Jones, who is one of my colleagues in the Florida Senate, who represents parts of Miami-Dade, Representative Ana V. Escamani, who represents parts of Orange County, Representative Angie Nixon, and Representative Michelle Rayner. And ultimately, some of their shifting excuses for why they didn't let us in landed on this explanation of they had unspecified safety concerns, to which I immediately acknowledged and pointed out that the president of the United States had just been there hours before, and they didn't have any safety concerns related to his visit.
And they don't seem to have any safety concerns when it comes to the people that are being detained there.
Certainly. I mean, the reason I was there was frankly because I had my own safety concerns about the conditions inside. And so they refused to let us in. We were there for about 2 hours trying to get people on the phone. Ultimately, someone from the Florida Division of Emergency Management actually hung up on us once we got them on the phone after they couldn't really explain why they weren't going to let us in. And, after days of media coverage around our visit and the state's illegal refusal to let us into that facility, they suddenly found out that other members of Congress were going to also make a visit down 2 Saturdays ago. And so they decided to preempt that by opening their doors to all members of Congress and all members of the Florida legislature to take a look for themselves. Now, before we went down there, ultimately, I joined the 4 Democratic lawmakers who were there with me when they refused us entry, and we filed a lawsuit against the state of Florida, specifically against Governor Ron DeSantis and Kevin Guthrie, who is the director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management that is running this site, which is another conversation in and of itself. And basically, we are asserting that the decision to refuse us entry without notice is against the law, and they need to grant us relief in the form of forcing the state of Florida to allow lawmakers from the Florida House and Florida Senate to be able to visit that site, to exercise our oversight authority at our pleasure. But when we did go there during the sanitized dog and pony show that they wanted to show us what they wanted us to see, we didn't really see much. I mean, they showed us a bunch of empty cages. They were very proud to show us, hey, look, Senator Smith, these toilets are working and they are flushing. They were toilets that were in an empty tent in an unoccupied cage that had never been used before. They refused to allow us the opportunity to actually speak to detainees, which honestly defeats the entire purpose. Anytime as an elected official, you make a visit to either a state prison, a correctional facility, or a detention center, basically one of the entire reasons you're there is to speak to detainees, to hear their stories, to find out what their experience is related to the conditions in the site. And we were denied that opportunity. We were given 30 seconds to stand in the doorway of one of the occupied tents where we were able to peer inside and see that they had 32 people basically caged within one caged unit, 32 per cage. The tent itself was sweltering heat, and we weren't really able to see much more than that. But when we were peering through the doorway, when I was looking through just to kind of see inside, it was very clear that the detainees knew that this was an oversight visit. They knew that there were elected officials who were there to see the conditions for themselves. And so they all began chanting together in unison. They were chanting, "Libertad, libertad, libertad," which means freedom in Spanish, which is a sad irony in the so-called state, the free state of Florida.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I'm just so grateful for you coming on, Senator, and Nadine, for inviting Senator Smith, and for your, tremendous efforts to expose this. I also really appreciate the fact that you cited the statutes that have been broken by this denial of access with such precision. Like, you with filing the suit, with insisting that those rights be honored. And DeSantis can't repeal those rights. Those are rights in the Florida law. They belong to you as a legislator, as you know, and they belong in essence to the people of the state to be able to see into facilities like this for real. Nadine and I were talking about, Russian propaganda and Russian interference. And there's a phrase for this that comes from Russian propaganda from the 19th century, which is Potemkin village, as you know. The idea that that was, fake villages created by a Russian field marshal to impress Catherine the Great. This idea of giving you a limited view, or stopping you from viewing it, but then giving you a very limited curated view. This is classic propaganda of, powerful people. And it's not just propaganda of a fake village. This is a village of people who've been seized. According to some of the most recent statistics by Trac, which tracks immigration detention, the overwhelming majority of people in detention have no criminal record whatsoever. And yet they're being treated not just like criminals, but in essence worse than criminals, in facilities that would not meet the baseline standards for a Bureau of Prison facility. And the conditions that you describe in terms of that tent, that heat, that concentration of people in one space, without necessarily access to the pristine bathroom down the way. In the Florida heat, it is inhumane. It's inhumane, hellish circumstances. And I've also read that lawyers who've gone to meet with clients, there's no place to meet with a client. There's no place to confer with a person who you're representing, trying to get them out, prove, for example, that they have a lawful basis for staying in the United States, so they've been unjustly seized. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that component, the denial of freedom, the denial of access to justice, and just the inhumane conditions.
It is not a transparent process. So what you've just identified here, Lisa, is that, attorneys who need to see their clients and have conversations with their clients who are detained in this Everglades detention camp are not succeeding in being able to do so, because the state has basically gone out of their way to make everything about this site as opaque as possible. They don't have information online about how people can contact this site. The limited contact information I have is a couple of email addresses that aren't even from government email addresses. They certainly are not being transparent about the contracts that have been issued, no bid contracts as it relates to who is getting paid to create this site. And I don't want to lose the forest for the trees either. Although they showed us a bunch of empty cages and a bunch of functioning toilets that had never been used before, which was meaningless to me as a lawmaker trying to exercise my oversight authority. The one thing that I was able to see, that I did learn during this sanitized tour of the Everglades detention camp, is that a lot of people are getting very rich off of this site. This site is estimated to cost the state $450 million per year to construct and operate, which is an incredible amount of money. And not only that, it's not only the tremendous cost associated with this site, which is absolutely not justified and is without even addressing the humanitarian issues and human rights violations associated with the construction of this detention camp. It's the fact that these contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts, are being basically handed out to top Republican donors without a bidding process and without a government procurement process. So all of this is happening under the guise of an emergency declaration that Governor Ron DeSantis issued over 2 years ago in 2023, where he declared a so-called state of emergency in Florida on immigration. And during that declaration, he initiated that by this infamous political stunt where he tricked a bunch of immigrants from Venezuela and other places into a plane where he then basically human trafficked them and sent them to another state against their consent and against their will. But now it has evolved to the fact that he has extended this state of emergency in Florida 15 times. And the state of emergency, as originally written, is based on outdated information and it's no longer relevant. But he's used the emergency declaration, now renewed 15 times, to assert emergency authority. First, to seize the land that is the airstrip in the middle of the Everglades. That airstrip did not belong to the state of Florida. It belonged to Miami-Dade County and Collier County. He seized that land from them without their permission and without giving them notice or compensating them for it, using emergency powers. Then he immediately directed the Florida Division of Emergency Management to put all the contracts together and to build this site in 8 days. Now, most people are familiar with or might remember the name, the Florida Division of Emergency Management, because that is the state agency that is tasked with helping Florida prepare for hurricane season and helping our state rebuild after hurricanes have devastated our communities. They also played a very large role in protecting Floridians during the COVID-19 pandemic, issuing vaccines, things of that nature. But now, this agency that has absolutely no experience detaining migrants, they have no corrections experience, they have no experience whatsoever in being able to do what they are being asked to do from the Division of Emergency Management, are now housing thousands of migrant detainees in inhumane conditions while squandering $500 million of Florida taxpayer money.
I heard, I think it was Congressman Maxwell Frost say somebody yelled, "I'm an American citizen," while you were there. Can you talk about, you said that they were claiming that these were the worst of the worst. Can you talk about who's actually there?
Well, sure. I mean, it has now been confirmed by the Miami Herald and several other entities that hundreds of detainees who are currently held captive in the Everglades detention camp are undocumented immigrants who are facing zero criminal charges. They have no criminal record and they have not committed any crimes. So it's already been proven that this statement that has been repeated by not only the federal government, the Trump administration, the president himself, but Governor Ron DeSantis and other right-wing leaders who run this state, that this is a detention center for the worst of the worst violent criminals. That is a deliberate lie that has been debunked. But even beyond the hundreds of migrants who are currently held there, who are mostly there because they were detained after a traffic violation, a minor traffic offense by entities like the Florida Highway Patrol that have now been deputized to do the work of Trump's deportation force. There's new reporting now that have shown that not only undocumented migrants who have not committed any crimes are being sent there, but that we have now DACA recipients have been detained and sent there. A DACA recipient was recently sent to this facility, and we all know that DACA recipients have legal status. It was recently uncovered that a 15-year-old boy was detained in the Everglades detention camp. And I just learned before I joined your show tonight, as reported in the Orlando Sentinel, that now it has been confirmed that a Mexican tourist who has an active tourist visa was detained in Central Florida, was kept in the Orange County jail for 72 hours, and was then transferred to the Everglades detention camp. So they are detaining tourists now who came from Mexico. We're talking about brown and Latino tourists. And we've now just heard from the Mexican consul and the president of Mexico, who are urging Mexican citizens not to visit the state of Florida. This can have devastating consequences on our economy. We know that Mexican tourists are actually basically the number 3 tourists, international tourists that visit Central Florida, that visit the Disney area, the number 3 country that sends international tourists to our region. And it's all because of this extreme right-wing agenda to lock up migrants, to lock up brown people, mostly Latino men, who have not committed any crimes.
And now word comes that Texas is looking to replicate this, even down to the appalling name, which in a country like ours, the appalling history of using the threat of alligators and to enforce racist ideology. I don't even take us all the way down that road. I do want to tell everybody that you are one of the people who has successfully sued Ron DeSantis in the past in your capacity as a lawmaker. And that, so, when you say you filed a lawsuit, people should sit up and take notice, because you're somebody who knows their way around that. Carlos, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll stick around for the next segment, because we're going to be talking about another conspiracy theory that has become law in the state of Florida. Not only has the state outlawed fluoride in a scene from Dr. Strangelove, but now Florida has banned weather-altering technologies.
Oh, boy.
Right? And so just so everyone is clear, that what this law does, it outlaws any attempt to alter weather, climate, or sunlight using chemicals, machines, or aircraft. And this is an absolute lunatic conspiracy theory where people have turned the water vapor, that comes from the back of an airplane, chemtrails, into this conspiracy that they are using it to suppress populations by spraying us, all of these things. So no one has applied to do weather modification in Florida. Chemtrails are just normal contrails from jets. And the law criminalizes this imaginary threat to satisfy basically internet-fueled fears. And so this is a state that time and time again, I guess Jewish space lasers will be next. I always forget whether it's the gays that control the laser, we're the ones that control the weather, not the space laser. But I'm sure there must be a bill in process right now in the state of Florida to ban the space laser as well. But yes, as somebody who sits in the midst of where these things are debated, here we are again, Florida being Florida.
That's right. And I voted against that bill, by the way, when it was in front of me.
We knew that. We knew you had to. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah. Please go on. Please go on.
Well, I mean, it's just when this bill came up, I was very confused. I had never been down this rabbit hole of chemtrails and what they were, and people saying that they see things in the clouds, that they see trails coming out of planes, and that the planes are poisoning them without their consent. It was acknowledged by the sponsor of the bill, Senator Ileana Garcia, that weather modification is actually not currently happening. but that she wanted to be preemptive and stop it from happening in our state because she believed that it could be harmful, which was a contradictory message because everyone that showed up in our committee said that the weather modification was poisoning them without their consent and that it was actively happening. I want to make sure that folks really understand the actual threat, like actual pollution and climate change is poisoning us. And as we speak, we know that the Trump administration is trying to get the EPA to propose repealing this finding that climate change actually endangers public health. Now, that's really bad because we know that greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, actually do pose a threat to public health. They come from vehicle emissions and other things. And those things actually are poisoning us, and they are bad. And climate change is bad. And we want to try to stop that. That is a real thing. So I was very perplexed about how the same group that says climate change is a hoax and that, this is not a real thing and everything is fine. We're now going on about chemtrails and about clouds in the sky that are poisoning them. I did not understand what was happening with this bill.
Do you think it's possible that we could sort of go onto Reddit and begin to posit really wild conspiracies that would cause them to do the right thing? Like, trans people really want everyone to have guns. We've got to stop the proliferation of guns because it's part of a LGBTQ. I think it's time for us to think outside the box because that seems to be the place where legislation that has legs, certainly in Florida and Texas, really gets started. But we're in a state where we know what the problems are. And, to revisit the Everglade cages, we are seeing hurricanes back to back to back. We're heading into hurricane season. And the only conversation they want to have about weather is this, not the massive flooding, not the absolute threat. I mean, who else would live in a structure that was constructed in 8 days? And yet we are putting people in the Everglades as hurricane season rapidly approaches after we've had several years of storms of greater frequency and intensity than we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And so it's just, good trouble, good conspiracy. I think I'm onto something. I think I'm onto something, but anyway.
I was gonna say, I appreciate this satirical note there, Nadine, because it really is astonishing. I'm so grateful for everything you said, Senator, about the real challenges we face. Right now, the Trump administration's Environmental Protection Agency is working to reduce and then eliminate the tracking of pollution, as well as that endangerment finding, which is the key to EPA initiatives to try to mitigate the climate change that's underway. So thank you so much for that shout out to the vital importance of that science about, what's happening in our world. A few years back, the Republicans controlling the state legislature in North Carolina and the governorship blocked study of coastal erosion as sea level rise has been, eroding the coast of North Carolina. But they're like, if we don't study it, it's not real somehow. Like they could just somehow avoid the reality of what's happening. And that this maneuver in Florida is just astonishing. I did look up, what percentage of the American people believe in chemtrails, and in a 2017 study, it was a solid 10%. And then another 20 to 30% thought it might be true. And I'm not saying that overlaps perfectly with Trump's base, but there is this percentage of people who have engaged in such a level of denial of reality that they believe things that are, have never been accepted by scientists, by the scientific community, and yet they would deny something that there is almost consensus on, which is that the release of carbon dioxide, the burning of carbon dioxide, is transforming our planet. Human-caused climate change is real, and it's actually happening at a much faster rate than scientists who had conservative figures and estimates predicted.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. I mean, it's just, and at a certain point, you have to reflect on how is it that all of these conspiracy theories are taking hold so quickly? We have real problems to solve. To your point, we have real threats. When it comes to going back to the Everglades camp, this $450 million, we could hire 8,200 new public school teachers in Florida.
Wow.
With that money.
Wow.
We could think about how many homeless shelters we can construct to get unsheltered folks into housing, or how much in down payment assistance programs we can fund to get people into stable housing with $450 million. This is not a small amount of money. And I know that the state now is now leaning in to their newly formed Florida Doge. At a certain point, I'm hopeful that during my next visit to the Everglades detention camp to see what the conditions are like, I'm hoping that Florida Doge will join me, because the wasteful spending that is happening there, in addition to the human cost and the humanitarian costs, is just out of control. We know currently that it costs the state of Florida on average $27,000 a year to incarcerate individuals in our state prisons. Just the back of the napkin math tells you that if this Everglades detention camp has a capacity of 5,000 beds, and they're spending $450 million, that's $90,000 a year per detainee. That's already 3 times what we're spending as a state in our corrections institutions. And for what purpose? For what purpose does it need to be on top of a swamp? The alligators are not a threat. They are not. The threat is mosquito-borne illnesses.
Yep.
The threat is extreme temperatures. The threat is the state of Florida not publishing what their hurricane evacuation plan is for that site, which will be obliterated in a Category 3 storm.
Yep.
Those, absolutely.
I was going to add just into the conversation, Senator and Nadine, not to get too far into the comments, but one of the commenters, made a note about how there was a Harvard University program to study geoengineering, as a suggestion that this is somehow makes these claims about chemtrails valid. But in fact, if people look more closely at the geoengineering, that's like the fantasy of billionaires like Charles Koch or Elon Musk. They think that somehow we can reverse the climate changes happening by, in the Harvard process, shooting particles into the air to somehow reflect away the sunshine that is bearing down on us and causing these storms. But I'm so grateful that there are people like you serving as public servants, Senator, who are based in facts, in science, who ground your actions in common sense morality and speak so compellingly the truth, Senator. So thank you so much for your bravery and for your determination.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it. The fight
continues.
We'll
have you play. Yes, absolutely. All right. We'll look forward to bringing you back soon. Take care.
Thanks, y'all.
So, wow. Yeah, the whole chemtrails thing is it's just madness, but it's also kind of takes us to one of our last conversation, which is the selective disbursement of information, the weaponization of agencies. This same government that has suddenly reversed itself and said we are not releasing anything about Epstein. Why are you still talking about this? Has begun to release information that it believes is embarrassing or harmful or supports whatever efforts they to attack their political opponents. And quite recently, we saw the Selective publication of the CIA's Martin Luther King files. You know something about the selective way that the government can release things to maximize embarrassment, not clarity. But what's your take on how this is unfolding? Because I think we'll end up talking a little bit about how it's playing out in the public.
Yeah, I mean, this is just another part of Trump's distraction carnival to try to distract from Epstein by releasing these files. There's really nothing significant, nothing new or significant in them. There was one little piece of news that the CIA had prepared talking points to deny that they had any involvement in anything to do with Martin Luther King, which, I appreciate the fact that they were, I guess, willing to somehow go on the record to say that they didn't have anything to do with it. Because when you look at the actual serious congressional investigation into the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., what you see in those files, this was part of the church committee. These were the church and Pike committees, were the committees that Congress created in the aftermath of revelations that the Nixon administration had been spying on Americans who opposed the war in Vietnam, including people like John Lennon and Joan Baez for daring to have a view about Vietnam. And that also Nixon had used the intelligence agencies to monitor communications with people from the United States and people in South America. And in fact, that Nixon's activities were built on like a set of activities by the intelligence community as it existed, predominantly under J. Edgar Hoover, who, was someone who was intent on gathering gossip about other people and creating these files. We know that the real bad guys in this surveillance, this surreptitious surveillance of Americans, including a specific targeting of Martin Luther King, that it was the FBI that was at the center of that under J. Edgar Hoover. And there's a volume, it's about this thick, you can get it from your library, on the Church Committee's report, specifically the book on Martin Luther King and all the ways in which the FBI, in essence, was monitoring for daring to promote racial integration in America, promote civil rights, protect the Voting Rights Act. And one of the revelations in that report from Congress over 40 years ago was that the FBI files included a proposed suicide note for Martin Luther King, in which they threatened him and suggested that he kill himself. That is a real revelation, and that was found by virtue of a legitimate, full-bore investigation by the United States Congress, not this sort of haphazard, let's just release stuff and see if something sticks nonsense from Donald Trump and his minions. And so I just think, if you really want to know the real story of the government's monitoring of civil rights workers, go check out that Church Committee report on Martin Luther King. These files don't have anything of consequence in them. But I also would be remiss if I didn't say that, at the same time that the FBI was obsessed with Martin Luther King, so was the John Birch Society, which Charles Koch was helping to fund and which his father helped create. It too was, I think, involved in the anti-fluoride conspiracy theories way back then. But one of the things that stunned me when I began an investigation into Charles Koch's true history, revealing that he in fact was a funder of the John Birch Society, not just that his father was that many of the books and articles put out by the John Birch Society weren't really about the United Nations, weren't about these other topics, conspiracy theories. They were about the civil rights movement. They cast aspersions on Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. They attacked civil rights organizing. They glorified the police. They sought to condemn the United States Supreme Court for protecting the rights of citizens to dissent. And so there are real stories about Martin Luther King, about civil rights movement, about the repression that was happening in the United States, including there's an amazing documentary that aired on PBS, I think last year or the year before, on the I can't believe I just forgot. There's an amazing documentary about, other Black power movements, about the Black Panthers in particular, and how they were targeted by law enforcement in this period. And there are other things that have been well documented, like the push, and more. So there is real history if you want it, but please don't think you're going to find it in this distraction carnival released by Donald Trump of Martin Luther King files.
I love that you call it a distraction carnival. I think that's the perfect way to describe it. But public opinion is shifting, and not only about what we are seeing with Epstein, but even this selective disbursement of data that they believe is helpful or creates a distraction. But I hope what people take away from this is a realization that the history of the United States has been a history of attacks, subterfuge, sabotage, vilification of Black leadership across the board. Because then you begin to understand why, despite the fact that research shows, for example, that Black Lives Matter protests were overwhelmingly peaceful, and that some high-profile moments of violence were actually instigated by, in cases, undercover police and others for the purpose of discrediting Black Lives Matter. But it's part of a long-standing, well-documented, even within FBI files, of discrediting movements by attacking leadership. And that is the overall takeaway that I hope people get. Yeah. And here we are. We come to the final segment in our show. It is the part we like to call the glass half full. And this is where we just take a moment not to ignore what's broken, but to remind ourselves of what's still beautiful, still bold, and still possible. And so,
all right,
we're going to preserve our drink for the end. Yes. But I mentioned twice now that they've gone to the well too often, and that the public is beginning to see that the emperor has no clothes. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I think that I don't follow all polls. I'm not someone who thinks that polls should tell us where we should go, but the polling on Trump has been really interesting, and I do think it is a glass half full moment. There is broad and growing disapproval of Trump in this second term. The approval ratings for Trump now have reached cumulatively 53 to 54% approval, disapproval, pardon me, 53 to 54% disapproval. His disapproval has grown by, almost 20 points, depending on the study you're looking at least, 10, 12, 15 points over these past 6 months. That people are rejecting him, are disapproving his policies, his immigration claims, other claims, his activities on immigration and other claims. In fact, the latest poll this week, which is coming out of CBS YouGov, says that Trump's approval rating has tanked with men during his second term. 53% of the men surveyed do not approve of Trump. And this is a reversal, because that had been a core part of his base, not the only part of his base. There are a bunch of white women in there who voted for him and have stuck with him regardless of all the evidence and allegations against him. But, I feel like for many of us, Trump's approval has been sort of a sticky thing. Like, how come they don't leave him? How come they don't see it? And, our very first guest that we had on, Nadine, who you mentioned, was talking about that crack in the veil, that crack in the illusion, and having that open up, and then hopefully having a way for them to be embraced as part of another community, because this MAGA community is very much its own community, pretty insular in lots of ways, but there are signs that this unified front backing Trump is cracking. And we see that even in Congress, where members of Congress who have been true believers on Trump or backers no matter what, they have objected to the failure to release the Epstein files. And just this week, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, basically canceled Congress for the next 5 weeks, sent them home early because they didn't want to vote on a resolution about Epstein. So they know that Trump is bleeding. not literally, but like bleeding supporters in essence, losing support because of this issue. And so I don't always celebrate polls, but the fact that the numbers are moving against him in significant ways, I do feel like this is a glass half full moment of the fact that this is not a monolith. It's not forever. It's not as sticky as it seems. And there's hope that more and more people will see the light and say, and disapprove of the actions of this president, and ultimately that we will be able to hold them accountable and, you know, take a different path for our country into a much brighter, better future.
Hear, hear. And to that, we raise our glasses. Clink. We're gonna have to learn to choreograph the clink between our boxes there. There we go.
Yes.
Well, I have really enjoyed this one. I really, I love having Carlos on it. We're gonna have to bring him back. But I'm Nadine Smith, along with Lisa Graves. Thanks for making space for the 5-8.5, your midweek breather. Be sure to tune in on Friday at 8 p.m. on the same channel for the 5-8 with Greg Oliar and Stephanie Koff. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will see you next Wednesday at 8. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.